Hello everybody, this is Professor Babcock, and today we're talking a little bit about James Joyce. Update for my Brit Lit class. You guys, we just finished, who did we do? Virginia Woolf. We're on to James Joyce today. The discussion question is up for today. What I've been doing so far is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you get a discussion question. And then you get 24 hours, like you get the whole day to turn that in. Some people have been having trouble with internet access, so instead of just doing 24 hours, I'm gonna, in the future, extend that. I'm not sure what that exactly means, if it'll be 48 hours, but the window of opportunity for you to comment in the discussion question on VCamp will be longer in the future, so look out for that. Also, by way of class notes, this Friday coming up is Good Friday, so we don't have class, not even virtual class. So we will reconvene on Monday with T.S. Eliot's best poet in the English language, maybe. I have an extremely high opinion of T.S. Eliot. He is little tough to get into, but I hope by the end of the day on Monday you'll see why I think he's so great, and he is. Okay, James Joyce today. I'm not going to give as long a lecture this time. I just want to make a couple quick notes about this guy. Irish, specifically Dubliner. All of his books focus on Dublin. Interestingly, he sort of exiles himself from Ireland, from Dublin, and then from Paris and other places in Europe, looks back over to Dublin, and like it sort of encompasses his whole creative mind, this city. He famously said, if Dublin were destroyed, it could be created again from the pages of my books. So he's really interested in faithfully recreating Dublin. It's like his obsession, this city in Ireland, but he pulls himself out of it. Like no one told him he had to leave, but he does. He removes himself from Dublin to get what he felt was more of an objective, artistic view from afar into his city. So, what I really want to discuss is an aesthetic question. We read for today. We read Araby, which is one of the vignettes in Dubliners. Dubliners is a series of short stories about folks who live in Dublin. We read, and then we read the final part of Ulysses, and then the third work I want to take into account is Finnegan's Wake. But before I compare these three things, a quick note on Ulysses. Ulysses, of course, is maybe not. Of course, maybe you're learning this stuff. Ulysses is Odysseus's Roman name. You know how the Greek gods all have two names? Okay, so Zeus is Jupiter. Zeus is Greek, Jupiter is Latin. Well, so it is with good old Ulysses. The Odyssey is written by Homer in Greek. Okay, so Odysseus, Odyssey, that's Greek. By the way, what is that story? To bring it all the way back, the cornerstone of Western literature is the Iliad. The Iliad is the story of Troy, the Greeks coming over to Troy to wage war against them. The Greeks are successful. They burn down Troy. They win the war with the Trojan horse. Whose idea was the Trojan horse? That's right, Odysseus. So he puts his Greek guys into the Trojan horse. The Trojans accept this sort of peace gift, what they think is a peace gift. They pull the Trojan horse into Troy, and then the Greeks come out of the Trojan horse. It's actually a Greek horse. I don't know why they call it a Trojan horse. The Greeks come out and they open the gates of Troy from the inside, and the Greek army comes in, and it's just, and the rest is history. That's the Iliad. The Odyssey, which is a sequel to the Iliad, tells the story of Odysseus. The whole thing is just Odysseus coming home. He's on the shores of Troy and he's got to get back to Greece, and he has many adventures and misadventures along the way. He's managed to really anger some gods, but he's really beloved by other gods, and so the gods sort of have this chess game against each other, and their pawn is Odysseus. So this is the story that James Joyce chose to name his book after. His book, Ulysses, is the story, 24 hours in the life of this guy, Leopold Bloom, who lives in Dublin. 24 hours of his life, and there are different episodes, and he doesn't live a fantastic life, he lives a pretty normal life. And he goes through a number of events in this 24 hours, and that sort of mirror imperfectly the story of the Odyssey. For example, Leopold Bloom comes across at one point in the day a guy, a worker with one eye. Okay, this is symbolic of the Cyclops that Odysseus back in the Odyssey has to face and fight, and he ultimately riddles his way out of the fight with the Cyclops. So it's stuff like that, like stuff that's sort of, if you squint, you can see how it sort of mirrors this guy's normal life as he goes through his 24-hour, a day in the life of Leopold Bloom, sort of mirrors what Homer, the plot points of the Odyssey. Okay, James Joyce is extremely interested in literary history. He knows what he's building upon. Now, if you recall, the principles of modernity, I said it's a period marked by a loss of faith in certain institutions, most importantly, the church, so loss of faith in God, and for some modernist poets and writers, loss of faith in the West entirely. We saw this with Hardy, who sort of despairs of Western civilization itself after he watches the horrors of World War I. Many different modernist writers after World War I, they just feel adrift, they feel lost. Like, what do we do in this horrible world where horrors, we thought we were safe, we thought everything was okay. And this happened? Where did this come from? And it didn't just happen, but a generation of European young men die in this useless, meaningless war. Like, what, you can't overstate how much that war just threw everyone for a loop. They just saw life as meaningless, as vicious, cruel, and without a purpose. As Hardy is the best probably example of that. So back to James Joyce. What does he lose faith in? He certainly loses faith in the church. But what about beauty? What about civilization? Now, he and Eliot are going to participate in a sort of reconfiguration of what Eliot calls a heap of broken images. Let me say that again, because that was a lot of words and a lot of thinking. These artists are participating in a reconfiguration of a heap of broken images. Okay, what does that mean? First of all, heap of broken images, Western culture. Okay, the Odyssey, which is which is adjacent to the cornerstone of the Western literary tradition, which starts with the Iliad. Now, of course, the Iliad isn't the first thing written in the Western world, of course not. But it's often seen it's the first great epic, perhaps. It's what everyone it's what literary artists over the course of the past 2+ millennia have looked to as inspirational, as a source of illusion upon which they can build. And certainly Ulysses by James Joyce is nothing if not elusive, with an A, A-E-L-L-U-S-I-V-E. Allusions everywhere. It's not just the Odyssey that he's alluding to, it's everything. There's allusions everywhere that he's taking Christianity. He takes the very opening of Ulysses is a mockery of the Eucharist, of what we might call the Lord's Supper. So he's taking these images, he's taking allusions from literary history, from real history, and building them together into some new thing. Yeats seemed to do this, but with less irony. Yeats seemed to have been a true believer in this new religion he was building. When you get to James Joyce, when you get to T.S. Eliot, it's a little less clear what their relationship is to this heap of broken images. It seems to be cynical at times, seems to be kind of negative at some times. How are we supposed to understand Joyce's take on the heap of broken images that is this sort of fallen, sort of stooped Western culture, decadent, a culture in decay, or at least so he thought. Well, to tackle this question, again, I want to put these three works of Joyce in a line. Dubliners, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. Okay, Dubliners, again, we read this, sad, beautiful story, very well written. I'm going to be, spoilers, I'm going to be critiquing James Joyce here. I think he's got some serious issues. But one thing we can say in his favor, he is, without a doubt, a first-rate writer in the English language. We see it in Dubliners. It's clear enough in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man that he is definitely top-shelf literature. He has technical skill. If you remember, we talked a little bit about, I'm going to jump over here. We talked a little bit about modern art, modernist art. A couple days ago, I told you about Fountain, which is a piece of work by this guy, Marcel Duchamp. Here is his piece of art. He put a latrine in a museum, signed his name, didn't even sign his name, signed a fake name, and called it art. That's kind of funny. I get it. That's hilarious that he's the first great troll. Like Banksy has nothing on Duchamp. It's kind of funny, but certainly not beautiful. And so the question arises, what is the purpose of art? Does art need to be beautiful? What are we after? What is the point? For the modernists, the answer seems to have been novelty. Make it new was a great slogan of the modernist era. Okay, make it new. Certainly no one had ever put a toilet in a museum before, so it satisfied that requirement. But, you think back to the aesthetes, you think back to Oscar Wilde, who was around not so long ago, okay? Excuse me. Had his heyday in the late 1800s. He was all about beautiful things, art for art's sake, and all that. And then, you get to Fountain, this work of art before you. It's clever. It's a funny idea. We're going to see art move from the realm of the aesthetic, from the realm of what's purely beautiful and appealing, to that's no longer the question what's beautiful, but what's interesting, what's new. Okay, I really want to draw a bright line between those two things. It's not necessarily about what's beautiful anymore. Now the question is what's interesting. Okay, huge shift in art. Okay, so what does that have to do with your boy James Joyce? Again, Dubliners, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. Dubliners, we can see he's a first-rate writer, no problem. Araby, the story, it is beautiful. It's this sad story of a boy who's in love with a girl, does not pull at your heartstrings, and he wants to give her this gift, but he is he's prevented from getting to the store on time, getting to the fair on time, because his uncle is drunk and forgot, and he lives with his aunt and uncle, of course. If you read the book, it said that every child in Dubliners is raised by an aunt or an uncle or both. Like every child is an orphan. Of course, orphanhood is a huge trope in pop culture these days. We've talked about this before. Name a literary or pop culture orphan. Let's see. How many can we do? Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Harry Potter, everyone in Star Wars. Can you name a character in Star Wars who's like not an orphan? Did Obi-Wan Kenobi have parents? Anyway, they're all orphans. This is it's a way of appealing to our sense of compassion. So this, back to Araby, it is a beautiful story. It's one that tugs on your heartstrings. This poor boy who is in love, but can't give the girl the gift, the prize that he promises her that he wants to, and it's just sad. It's mournful. It's it satisfies the requirement. Oscar Wilde, you could see him liking this thing. Yeah, it is sad but beautiful. It's good art. Then you get to Ulysses, and the question changes. Now, you might be asking, well, can't art be beautiful and interesting? Of course it can be. There doesn't need to be this fight between. I said I want to draw a line between beautiful and interesting, but that line is not necessary to art. Certainly, art can be both beautiful and interesting. The Odyssey, I think, is both beautiful and interesting. Well, again, the modernists, privilege the one above the other to the point where some of the modern artists jettison beauty entirely. Okay, so it's not me who's putting up this wall that doesn't need to be there. They are doing it. I blame them. Okay, and what we're going to see again. One more time with feeling. Dubliners, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. We're going to see a migration away from the art for art's sake, away from, in my opinion, just a goal of establishing beauty first, and then you don't want it to be uninteresting, but a sort of beauty first approach to art until we get in Ulysses. We've kind of we're at a crossroads. And when we get to Finnegan's Wake, we are purely in the land of novelty, interesting idea. Beauty seems to be a tertiary concern at best. Now, that's a pretty hot take. There are folks who are going to defend Finnegan's Wake as a beautiful piece of literature. I am dubious of such claims. Okay. Maybe the thing to do now is to just look at Finnegan's Wake, which I've had sitting up on the screen for, 10 minutes now. You'll notice that the first word is not capitalized. This is correct. This is how James Joyce wanted it. Let's just read the first few words, shall we? Okay. Finnegan's Wake, Book 1, Episode 1, James Joyce. River run past even Adams, from swerve of shore of bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Sir Tristram, Violere de Mores, for over the short sea, had Passencor re-arrived from North America on this side of the scraggy isthmus of Europe Minor to... And it goes on like this for 600 pages. Now, to be fair, if you have like a microscope and Wikipedia and like a separate book to read through this stuff, maybe you can muddle through it. I have determined that I determined this at age 20 that this book was not worth my time. Now that I have this fancy PhD and have studied European languages more than most will say, I just don't think this is worth my time. Maybe there's something there. You know, okay, if I'm talking to someone, a fellow professor will say at a conference, and they say something like, "Oh, Finnegan's Wake is my favorite book." I smile and nod, and on the inside, I'm like, "That is the most pretentious thing you could possibly say." That's just a way of saying I'm very smart, and I know how to read this book, and it's, you know, look how great I am, and I'm of the opinion that the emperor has no clothes. Now, even then, I kind of want to hedge my bets. Is it possible that there is a person out there who is so educated, who has studied Joyce so long that they do genuinely get enjoyment, that they do genuinely see some beauties in this book? I do want to hold out that possibility. But again, why is it so hard? Why are we so fascinated with what's so hard? This is a question Yeats asks. Remember, he writes this poem of the fascination of what's difficult. Why is it necessary for Joyce, who does have technical skill? Now, Duchamp, it's not clear to me at all that he has any technical skill as an artist. This took, like, I could do this, you could do this. You know, it's a running joke. People go to a modern art museum and they say, my kindergartner could do this. And they're right, by the way. Your kindergartner can do Jackson Pollock 80% well. Like, we know that. I'm gonna get flamed for that, but it's true. It's not. One art professor tells the story of this. He'll put a piece of an artwork in front of his freshman on day one and say, you know, and it's a Pollock. It's a Pollock painting. And he'll say, explain to me why this Pollock painting is good. And it's just, you know, Pollock. With Jackson Pollock, he just splotches of color. There's not even shapes. It's just color splotches over the canvas. And his freshman will explain to him, oh, it's, you know, it's color balance. It's, you know, the choices of where to throw, you know, yada, yada, yada. And at the end of class, he reveals that this is not a Jackson Pollock painting. It's his apron. It's his painting apron that's just been used for years. And he put them in front of them and put this chaotic piece of garbage in front of them and called it art, and they explained to him why it was good art. And he uses this not to prove the point that art is whatever you say, but to prove exactly the opposite, that if garbage looks like art, maybe that's a problem. Not for garbage, but for art. Okay, so I'm arguing that Joyce is migrating to the land of novelty, maybe even the land of shock. Okay, he's very sexually explicit. Armorica is a sexual pun. He has the word penisolate, that's a sex pun. And before we even get out of this second paragraph, I can see at least one more. Maybe there's even more that are just going over my head. Bottom line here, you know, anyone who says they enjoy Finnegan's Wake, I smile and nod, and on the inside, I think, okay, like you're just trying to impress me. That is honestly what I think. Now, Ulysses, that's a little tougher because Ulysses, you know, I didn't reread it in preparation for this class because it is very long and I don't have the time. Ulysses is somewhere in between. Okay, as you saw from the Penelope section, and Penelope is the character to whom Molly Bloom is linked. Okay, in the the main character is Odysseus, and Molly Bloom, his wife, is Penelope, Odysseus' his wife. Okay. So we call that last part the Penelope part because it's the part two that corresponds to that part in the Odyssey. Confused yet? Anyway, there's no punctuation. It's stream of consciousness. Okay, so James Joyce is trying to mimic the way people actually think, and it's thinking hard to read, isn't it? I don't know how enjoyable it is for you. For me, it's like I slog through because this is a great book. I slog through because James Joyce is objectively talented. Unlike Marcel Duchamp, James Joyce is objectively a first-rate artistic talent. We can see that from his other works. But, you know, I look at the Penelope chapter and I just wonder, can't you, James Joyce, aren't you good enough, aren't you talented enough to achieve this effect in a more appealing way? Do you need to be so confounding? And maybe his answer is yes. So this, you know, the questions I'm throwing at you right now, I've got some opinions. My mind isn't settled on all of these though. So some of these, you know, I'm just spouting off, and whatever sticks for you sticks for you. I hope it's helpful. Or maybe you don't like what I'm saying, and you're clarifying your own mind by seeing what you don't think, by contrast. So, Ulysses, it's certainly interesting. Is it beautiful? Parts are, but we can see anyway. What we can say for sure is that James Joyce is interested in building a new structure out of again Eliot's heap of broken images. He's going to borrow from wherever he wants, throw it all together, and make it new. Make something, make Western culture new. I guess in closing here, I just want to express a deep ambivalence, deep ambivalence on my part toward this attitude. Because why? Because when Marcel Duchamp when he put a toilet in a museum, that is kind of hilarious. Like, that's a good troll. Like, 10 out of 10, good job. It's funny. It's not beautiful, but okay, does all art need to be beautiful? Maybe not. Maybe he's just making a point. And if we read that point about, like, look, they'll post anything, that's kind of funny. Like, that's a critical point. It reminds me of Jonathan Swift. Let's eat the Irish. The problem is that's not how Marcel Duchamp's fountain was read. It was read as, oh, we should all be doing this now, to the point where somebody literally pooped in a can and put it, like, it's not a joke, a can of poop, and put it on a shelf somewhere in a museum. That to me is that's a travesty. The joke's not funny anymore. It's just ridiculous. The emperor is wearing new clothes. If you think that I have no respect for the idea that, oh, this is art. Like, no, it's poop in a can. Like, come on, guys. Like, am I the crazy one? Like, can we stop acting all hoity-toity and artistic and, like, open-minded and just call a spade a spade? So I am willing to go that far again with Finnegan's Wake and say it looks kind of like a dude pooped in a can. It's complicated. Maybe there is something there. I'm just not willing to devote 5 years to digging it out, and I wonder why anyone would be. But maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental. Maybe I do want to leave a sliver of hope there. Whereas for much of modern visual art, I have made up my mind. It has been going in an awful direction for 100 years. I'm not saying there's been no good art for 100 years, but I'm saying the prevailing attitude of shock, of being interesting or new or shocking as the primary preoccupation in art for 100 years, that's a mistake. If that's your primary goal, is to shock and cause unease, that's a mistake. Can't you at least be beautiful? Is there anything redemptive about your art? You can be interesting and redemptive at the same time. It's just a lot harder. It's a lot easier to just shock. It's a lot easier to poop in a can than it is to develop the technical talent and do something beautiful and new. That's almost impossible. There's a reason why these artists are copping out. So, hot takes all around. James Joyce, Ulysses is worth reading. English majors. Maybe take a look at that someday. Know that there is some sexually explicit stuff in there. It's not for beginners. Finnegan's Wake, skip it. See you next time with T.S. Eliot.